mobility on demand technologies hold great promise, and the things above the line here are the things that you hear about in connection with autonomous vehicles or automated vehicles or driverless cars, what people call the Google car. And that is being able to deliver the equivalent kinds of opportunities to travel that you get with a private automobile. But we were able to do with either autonomous vehicles or with what I call better drivers, which is remotely piloted vehicles. There you're also able to provide transportation on that same basis, essentially on demand, using technology for people who cannot drive. This is a significant difference. Both of these technologies promise large public benefits by reducing crashes. We know this, well, get to that another time. Below the line are the items that I believe are unique to remotely piloted vehicles as opposed to autonomous vehicles. Merit-based jobs for better drivers, incentives for millions of people to improve their driving habits in order to be able to get those kinds of jobs, and being able to pay for the infrastructure necessary to support these services through client fees. The way that we're going to operate the session this morning is we'll have brief presentations or brief talks from each of the presenters, and then we're going to reserve the last 30, 40 minutes for discussion with you about what kinds of things can be done with these technologies to deliver services. Now, I believe that by 2020, we can have remote operation of vehicles by qualified remote operators, and that would be complementary to autonomous vehicles. Now, people sometimes use these terms interchangeably, but there are differences, but again, they're complementary. We're talking about autonomous vehicles, we're talking about vehicles that are intended to be run high speed, long distances, likely on separated rights of way, and do not use drivers. Remote piloted vehicles, on the other hand, are going at low speeds with air jet engines, at low speeds over short distances, and can operate concurrent mixed traffic. Every place a car can go can be done with this. And I'm suggesting we would start with professional drivers. And the way that these relate, what makes them complementary is you can think of remote pilot vehicles being in a constrained service area like you would on a cable TV service. So you have these islands of services that then connect to these to the autonomous separated roadways. That's how you're able to get the network effects to scale this. So we now have available, you're going to hear from the other speakers on the new service models, new vehicles, and new infrastructure that will allow for these revolutionary communications and productivity. There are the key aspects of this are system acceptance.
And all.
There's a lot of background noise. Could you adjust the volume of the speakers?
Hello, check. Hello, check 1, 2. Is that better?
That's better.
All right. Sorry about that.
Unanticipated background noise.
So the first speaker you'll be hearing from will be Ben Lee from Autopilot. Their slogan is "Your car, our driver, on demand," and he's demonstrating already the market development of driving services. I'm looking forward to seeing his presentation. He'll be appropriately enough. He'll be presenting remotely. We'll next year from the MV1 mobility vehicle, which we have Rob Taylor here, and he'll be talking about this vehicle, which has certainly captured my imagination. A vehicle built for the luxury paratransit market, and that's being adopted by public transit agencies, as you can see on this slide. Next, we'll hear from Patrick Dwan from BYD Motors, Inc. BYD introduced a vehicle on the Chinese consumer market in August that it has remote control. We'll tell us more about that and other things. I'm really looking forward to hearing that as well. And then we'll hear from Barry Einstein of Cisco about how they've been integrating interoperable platforms on automobiles. Appropriately enough, this idea the idea of remotely piloted vehicles was hatched at an event that Cisco is hosting. And then our final speaker will be Larry Herman. They're doing systems engineering on the feasibility of this concept on Cape Cod, and he'll tell us how they're trying to pull all these kinds of technologies together. In fact, if we could just get these speakers all to agree to do it, we could be doing this stuff in about 18 months. But at least we got them on the program today, so we'll hear from each of them. The key aspect that you get from these things I mentioned before is safety, and that can only be achieved if you're able to have high assurance, low latency, secure communications. So we know what the boundaries are for this, at least what's been posited from the Commercial Vehicle Infrastructure Integration Program on the Connected Vehicle Test Bed. So I'm hoping that in our discussion we'll be able to talk about what are some of the options for meeting those thresholds. And ultimately, you can't deliver this without actually having better drivers. Integrating driver feedback systems with the controls on a vehicle isn't that far off. They're already reporting these things out in the Hyder bus systems. They call it GBOS. There are separate systems. This is integrated at the factory by the manufacturer. So how do you make these things work? It's going to take systems architecture. Fortunately, we don't have to start from scratch. There's a lot of work already been done on the transit communications interface profiles. The model architecture, I don't expect you to read it from here, but all these slides will be available for download, thanks to Lou Sanders for providing this slide. And the beauty of that architecture is it goes to, works very broadly, and it is extensible. So with that, my conclusions are the technologies and markets are here now, that the remote operation of private vehicles by qualified remote operators, autonomous vehicles, is complementary to autonomous vehicles, and that the Cape Cod Systems Engineering Project is looking for partners. So you might want to think about ways that you might be able to get involved in that project. And of course, since I work for the Transportation Research Board, research is needed in order to make sure that these sorts of things come to fruition in that timeline. So with that, Ben Lee is up. Ben is on speakerphone. Ben, can you hear us?
I can.
All right.
Yes, hear me okay?
Can you guys hear him? I'm going to take that as a no. So
Testing.
okay. Try again.
Can you guys hear me now?
Oh yeah. So let's get you open.
Alright, thanks, Stefan. Hi everyone, I'm Ben. I'm one of the founders of Autopilot, and it's really great to join you today from Charlotte. So Autopilot is a platform that connects riders with on-demand drivers at the push of a button. And whether it's a night out in town, a trip to the doctor, or helping an aging parent run to the grocery store, Autopilot makes your life easier, safer, more fun, and more convenient. Now, can I do a show of hands? I actually thought I was going to be doing this via Skype, since I kind of find my face a certain way, but perhaps, Stefan, you can kind of be my eyes and ears there. Can I get a show of hands? How many of you guys have seen the movie Date Night?
I see about 6 hands.
Next slide, please. Me filling clips.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's basically this funny movie about a suburban couple whose date night has gone awfully wrong. And so this is Phil and Claire, played here by Steve Carell and Tina Fey. But like many of you in this room, they're married, they have 2 kids, and they live in the suburbs. He's a lawyer and she's a realtor, and every once in a while they like to go to the city and have a good time. Next slide. But waking up without your car the next day is never any fun. Especially if you have to take the kids to soccer practice, or if you have to head into the work at the office. Good luck trying to wake up your wife at 6 a.m. or finding a friend to take you downtown. Next slide. So what do? Well, you could take a taxi, but what if you end up riding the Travis? And so if you're like most people, you probably decide to take a chance. And here's what that chance looks like. Next slide. 87 times. Let me repeat that, 87 times. You guys know that's the number of times the average individual has driven drunk to And if you ask people why they do it, they'll tell you that the number one reason they drink and drive is the need for their cars the next day for work or family-related obligations. And we've solved that problem. Next slide. In fact, the great thing, nightlife is really just the beginning, because autopilot, as I said in the beginning, is the perfect fit for the elderly, the business person, and individuals with medical appointments. So let me give you an example. According to the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety, by 2030, 1 out of every 5 individuals in this country will be over the age of 65. Now, I don't know about you, but I recently watched my dad try to take away keys from my aging grandfather. Now, he's actually 82. He thinks he's going on 50 this year. And to him, he's just getting started. And what that means is that he definitely doesn't want to lose his mobility and his independence. Not to mention, he doesn't want to feel like a burden to my dad and my uncle. Now, we may laugh, but the reality is in our fast-paced modern world, our needs and our expectations for mobility and demand are ever increasing. And our current transportation solutions are falling painfully short of that mark. Next slide. And that's where autopilot comes in. We offer 2 types of on-demand services, your car or their car. Option 1 is a driver for your car, much like a personal chauffeur. And option 2 is what we call rideshare. Think of it as though you were riding with a friend in their car. So as you can see from the screenshots there, using our iPhone app, you decide whether you want to ride in your car or their car. You choose where you want to go. Your phone actually geolocates you, meaning that it finds your location on its own and pre-fills the destination. You watch your driver come to you in real time on a map, and then everything gets paid for with your credit card and phone. It's easy, it's transparent, it's affordable, and it's on demand. Next slide. So how does it work? We connect people in the community who have a desire to make extra money while helping others that are looking for a ride. We've hired people like elementary school principals, college students, sales guys, even former EMS. We vet the drivers, we coordinate the logistics, we handle the credit card processing, so you can enjoy an entirely seamless and cashless transaction. And in return, we retain a small percentage of the fare. We're extremely excited about what we're building because it presents a triple net bottom line. We're creating jobs by leveraging existing human capital and infrastructure. We're promoting safety, and it's an and challenging technical problem to solve. Next slide. But with the introduction of change, the big question that naturally comes to mind is it safe? And our answer would be absolutely. Not only do we go the extra mile to do video and in-person interviews, as well as driving regular background checks during the onboarding process, we also provide real-time GPS tracking on all trips. Our drivers receive ongoing training. Passengers and drivers are both required to rate each other at the end of each run. Can you say that about your current experiences with calling a taxi? Next slide. So now you know what we're building and why we're building it, but you might be asking yourself. I don't know if some of you guys in the room have heard of Uber, and you might be asking yourself, why not Uber? That's a great question. For those of you that don't know, Uber is basically an on-demand limo service. So you can push a button in the town car that shows up at your doorstep within minutes. But cities like Charlotte, like Phoenix, like Austin, and LA are not like San Francisco or New York. And so while Uber is great for high-density areas where people typically don't own cars or only need to travel short distances, beyond that it becomes ridiculously expensive. And since cabs are often unreliable, autocars best fit for mid-market cities. Our fares start at just $15, and we specialize in addressing the transportation needs of cities with banking communities around. Next slide. We're the perfect team to deliver the safety and security because we know the competitive landscape. Our CTO and our talented team have over a decade of experience in mobile technology. They've cut their teeth at places like Sandia, Berkeley, Redbridge Hub, Vivendi, and Leesburg. They've spent their time focusing on real-time integration of software and hardware so we know how to swap this. And I know how to scale a business from my experience in starting and exiting one of the largest and fastest-growing organic companies in the country. But that's not all. To date, we've facilitated thousands of autopilot rides. And this market is huge, but you might be asking yourself, how do we tackle it? And as Stephanie said, there are a lot of moving pieces already in place. This is what we know. The tax taxi and town car industry currently transports over 2 billion passengers each year. And we covered an enormous outlier that's not even being tracked. Based on our experience, we estimate this to be a $30 billion market. And we believe that for people to use this, it's simply a matter of getting the word out about how easy, safe, transparent, and affordable autopilot really is. In closing, we're looking to expand rapidly over the next 18 months. But to do so, we need boots on the ground. Because unlike your typical tech startup where you can just add servers, we actually have a need to scale operationally. And so we're looking for partners in the automotive space and advocates with strong relationships in the public policy arena. If you're passionate about entrepreneurship and you want to help us tackle a national problem, we'd love to talk to you. My contact info, Ben at autopilot.io is there on the screen. And as it says, we're Autopilot, your driver on demand.
Any questions for Ben? Okay. So, I'm sorry, yes.
What markets is Autopilot operating in?
So the question then is, what markets is Autopilot operating in now?
We're currently in Charlotte, but we have a pretty rapid expansion plan to go to 3 to 5 cities over the next 18 months, both along the East Coast and the West Coast.
Did you all hear that? East Coast and West, both along the East Coast and the West Coast, 3 to 5 cities over the next, did you say 18 months? Yeah. Okay, so our next presenter is Patrick Wan from BYD Motors Inc.
All right, good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Yep, okay. So thank you for having BYD here today. And for the Suri model, BYD has sold about 60,000 of the Suri vehicles in China since it's introduced in the Chinese market in August last year. So the remote driving control technology was definitely a sparkling setting point for the vehicle. It won the best science and technology award in 2012's Beijing International Auto Show. So basically, the remote driving control technology allows many of the vehicle functions, the vehicle features, to be performed by a remote key, remotely by a remote key. So within a certain range, right now, with the current design, the range is 10 meters, which is 33 feet. So within 33 feet range, with the remote key in your hand, you can start the car, you can move forward and back, and you can turn left and right without the driver even being in the vehicle. So right now, for safety consideration, we have a speed limit of 1.2 mile per hour when you move the car using the remote key. So it's a perfect solution when the parking space is not wide enough for the driver to exit the car once it's parked. It's a perfect solution. It's perfect for squeezing into very tight parking space. So if you don't have enough space for the doors to open after the car is parked. So in other words, you can get out of the car first before parking the vehicle by a remote key. So this technology also helps different weather conditions. For example, like very windy and rainy weather, you can move your vehicle remotely from the parking spot outdoor in the parking lot to the curbside, so the driver and passengers won't get wet. And also, like summer and winter time, you can start the engine, you can start the car, and the air conditioning can automatically start. So that's another utilization of this technology. So basically, a few years ago, when we talk about remote driving control technology, we generally thought of very small, scaled down vehicles underfoot. So now the technology is real, it's not a toy anymore. We are not sure where the technology is heading, but my humble opinion, my hope is taking the speed limit and range limit out of the technology. Probably in 20 years, when you get into a taxi, there's no driver over there, and taxis are driven by a system remotely, which is operated by a dispatch center maybe 20 miles away from you. Or you drive to work with other technology. You drive to work, the car can be driven. You don't have to hold the steering wheel. The car is driven by itself, by software or program integrated in the car. Everything can happen. So basically, the technology is there. We sold 60,000 cars in China, and it's very popular in China right now. We don't have any car models with this technology in the U.S. yet, but the technology is proven. We hope what we just talked about is not far from us. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Next, Rob Taylor will talk about the MV1 vehicle.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Welcome to Phoenix. Anybody here from Phoenix besides me? I live and work here. 84 degrees today. It's what we call spring. Good thing you're not here in about 3 weeks, because once it flips to summer, it's not very nice outside. Anyways, good morning. What is MV1? MV1, the acronym, simply means Mobility Vehicle 1. Give you a little background. We're supposed to have 2 speakers here today. The representative from the manufacturer, last minute couldn't be here, so you're getting second string. Apologize, I'll do my best. History, MV1 was born about 8 years ago. Former executive with one of the big 3 auto manufacturers is in a wheelchair. I don't know why. Traditional vehicles for wheelchairs consist of minivans that are modified, full-size vans. He owned one of those products. After a few years of owning it, he became dissatisfied with how often it had to be serviced, components breaking down. As an executive, he had a lot of high-powered friends in the automobile industry. And they got together and they said, let's do something about this. Let's create, design, engineer a vehicle built from the factory that's wheelchair accessible. And basically, in a nutshell, that's how MV1 came to be. MV1 is, the pilot company is called VPG, Vehicle Production Group. They're based in Allen Park, Michigan. They are the United States #4 auto manufacturer now. It is a joint cooperation between several well-known companies. Ford Motor Company, for example, builds the chassis and the engine components for the MV1. Roush Engineering, better known for racing components, actually has an engineering group that created not only the ramping system that's on board on the MV1, but also the suspension components. Lastly, the vehicle is built by AM General. Some of you may or may not know AM General is a provider of military-type vehicles. Humvee, for example, used to manufacture the H2, which was a retail product. As I said earlier, MV1 currently has about a network of 80 dealers in the lower 48 states, and that's growing. This product, 8 years old, is in its 3rd year on the market with the product, the 2013s being the 3rd year. Features 3 model groups within that, the SE or the base unit, a DX, deluxe unit, and the new LX, which will be a more luxurious version of the vehicle. As I was preparing this, I was trying to think of mobility on demand and what it means to consumers and to paratransit people. Folks in this room, you probably cover all those aspects. As a consumer myself, I tried to think, what is it that drives me to purchases the same for a person in a wheelchair? Core values. So that's why I kind of directed it. I started with safety. To me, we're all price driven, of course, but the safety aspect of this type of vehicle and what it does is very important. So MV1 is a purpose-built factory vehicle. It is the first of its kind. It's built at the factory to be wheelchair accessible. A converted vehicle is modified. Traditionally, what you have out there are minivans and full-size vans that are greatly modified or have equipment installed in them to make them accessible to pick up the chair, the scooter, or whatever that person has. Let me get into modify a little bit more, because the importance here is the factory built. Modification to a van can include, I'm speaking of minivans, they take the OEM floor and they cut it completely out of the vehicle. They have to create headroom for a person in a wheelchair to get into the vehicle. They take the floor out and put a new floor in, lowering it. They take off the OEM exhaust system. They take off the OEM fueling system. They have to do these things because they're creating room for these wheelchairs to go into a vehicle that were never designed or intended to do this type of work. They work great. I've worked for a couple of these companies. I had 15 years in this industry. MV1 to me was a breath of fresh air, and it was greatly needed in this industry. The OEM is built on a chassis, a truck chassis, half-ton truck chassis. Because it was designed to be wheelchair accessible, we don't drop the floor. We don't take the OEM exhaust system off or the fuel system off. It was designed this way, so it's built to be accessible. Nothing's modified to the floor. The fueling system on an MV1 comes in 2 platforms: gasoline, compressed natural gas. For the paratransit and taxi markets, CNG is one of the futures in our industry. Supply and demand. Right now, the fueling stations for CNG are not great, but it is improving. MV1, because of its safety, being built on a truck chassis, not having its floor modified, it basically is a vehicle that is built not only for safety but for durability. It comes standard with 4-disc brake systems, has oversized brake rotors built right in it, again because it was designed this way. ABS, traction control, electronic stability control with an anti-roll functionality are built right in. Self-leveling rear suspension on the vehicle that automatically adjusts the vehicle to the load. MV1 can carry more than 1 wheelchair, so when it first came to market, it came to market for the paratransit and taxi services, and now it's being more directed towards the retail market as well. It's available for both markets. That same aspect of safety kind of falls into the durability and value, what I sell to my customers. It's safer than a modified vehicle, makes it a better value overall. A factory design ramp system, either electric or manual. Stop here and think about this. When you have a lot of moving parts and they work for a very long time, typically they need service, they break. MV1 has not only an electric ramp, a manual ramp, which by way of a person properly using their knees and bending down and pulling the ramp out and pushing it in, no moving parts. What is there to break? You have service cost savings opportunity when you choose the MV1, because with that manual ramp, there's nothing to break. So it makes it kind of attractive in that group. The other thing you should think about is considering the MV1, when it does have the electric ramp, the initial service cycle is 7,500 cycles, meaning you run the ramp out once, run it back in, 1 cycle. For the paratransit or private consumer, you have 7,499 more cycles until it even needs its first preventative maintenance and service. Ground clearance of 6 inches is very big on the MV1, especially in the rural areas here in Arizona. We have speed bumps, we have roads that are not even paved. You take a vehicle like the minivan I mentioned earlier and you drop the floor, well, you've just got ground clearance. Eventually, you're going to bottom that vehicle out. You're from the big cities, you have things called potholes. Some of them eat vehicles. Well, you can imagine what that does to a wheelchair accessible vehicle. It's very important to have a vehicle. People that are in wheelchairs, physically challenged, I don't like the word handicapped. I'm a father of a challenged child myself. They hang on to these vehicles longer because they're a need product. They have to have them. They have to go to the doctor and the market and everything that you and I do. They typically hang on to these vehicles a lot longer. MV1 offers them a much longer service life, better value. Traditional van modifiers use medical equipment dealers to sell and service their vehicles. MV1 kind of took a different approach since it's factory built. They wanted to eliminate the dual service aspect of it. If you buy a minivan, I'm not going to pick on anybody, but Toyota Sienna, for example, you have it modified and you need the brakes changed, you're probably going to take it to the Toyota dealer. If the ramping system or anything about the accessibility has an issue, you have to take it to a mobility store to have that repaired. MV1 saw this and anticipated potential savings for consumers and commercial people by making the distributing point also a service point. So MV1 customers, they buy it from me at my local dealership here in Phoenix, and something goes wrong, they bring it back to me, whether it's an engine, a brake, or a ramping system. Another cost savings opportunity. Cost, third on my list, but probably most important to most folks. Don't know if you know this, the single most contribution to any physically challenged consumer, or any consumer for that matter, is saving money. Economic conditions nationally and internationally are forcing all consumers to spend more wisely. Accessibility is costly. Modifying minivans or retrofitting full-size vans can be very expensive. As an example, typically a minivan drop floor electric ramp modification costs between $15,000 and $30,000 on top of what they paid for the van itself. 2013 MV1 SE model, that's my manual ramp I alluded to, starts at $39,000 out the door. How much does the MV1 contribute to improve mobility? Mobility on demand. I call it universal accessibility with dignity. Most paratransit, most vans that move accessible people do it from the second row or the third row. Kind of less than good feeling for a person who's already physically challenged. MV1 has shotgun seating right in the front row, right next to the driver. You're moving that person in a chair who can see the world and be dignified. It's very important. Durable by purpose, more value for all. Lower cost of purchase, universal mobility with dignity for all. America built and backed. It's Buy America approved, FTA approved, and exceeds ADA guidelines. Why would you buy or ride anything else? Thank you.
So we've heard about new services, we've heard about a couple of new vehicles, and next we're going to hear about the network systems that make this stuff possible. Next up is going to be Barry Einzig from Cisco Systems. And we just put this away.
Okay, everybody's been sitting there passively listening, so let's engage a little bit. How many people here in the audience have heard the term Internet of Things? Show of hands. Okay, so we have a little bit of work to do here. How many people are, and there's a little bit of gray hair in the audience, how many people are old enough to remember when GPS was classified sensitive information? Okay. How many people understand the financial impact to our industry of declassifying GPS? Okay, so when we talk about those type of commercial applications of Department of Defense technologies, it's not too far of a stretch to see where Stefan is headed with autonomous and remotely operated vehicles, right? So a little bit more of background. Years ago, there was a program called IDHS. IDHS was centered around DSRC communications. And then for a short period of time, there was a program called IntelliDrive. When IntelliDrive was introduced, your architecture drawing got popped up, and other modes of wireless communications were introduced as potential uses for IntelliDrive. Today, we call it connected vehicle. There are many people that believe that this is something that will never happen. It's just physically impossible. I'm here to tell you that the automobile manufacturers see it as a way to continue to sell automobiles. You heard it from BYD, you heard it from MV1, right? The reality is there are impediments to continuing to allow the human-machine to interface to be primarily the human, right? It's an impediment to safety, it's an impediment to mobility, and most importantly for the OEMs, and it's an impediment to sales. It's really difficult to sell a new automobile to my 82-year-old mother-in-law, right? But she still wants to be able to get around. There are several initiatives that are going on. NHTSA is getting ready to make a decision to decide on connected vehicle this year. The Europeans are working on a program called eCall. So it is something that is happening very rapidly. At Mobile World Congress this year, there were 2 automobile manufacturers at the world's leading mobility wireless conference. The biggest one was Ford. They had a huge presence there. So these things are real. This is beginning to happen. The technology is being engaged. There's as you heard earlier, presentations yesterday, there's a test bed in Michigan. There's test beds in a number of parts of the country. So when states begin to compete at a test bed level, you know things are starting to gain some inertia towards building out these connected vehicle networks. So there were a lot of people that didn't raise their hands. So we'll start with kind of a definition of what the Internet of Things is. And to clarify, the Internet of Everything to Cisco really goes the next level above the Internet of Things. I'm not going to read it to you. You can read what that means, but essentially, the next slide does a little bit more illustrative. So if you think back decades ago, we had a stack of floppies, and depending on what generation you started in, they were either 5.25 or 3.5, right? They were either 5.25 or 3.5, and your way to file transfer was to take that stack of floppies from one PC, move it over to another PC, and re-engage those. So basic connectivity started, 25 years ago, right? Then we started to move into a networked economy where things started to move forward, and we had this new thing called a browser, and people started to engage. It created a digital economy and e-commerce. It was very disruptive to many business models, and there are entire industries that are virtually wiped out today because of it, but there are all new industries that have become available because of it. And now we're really into the immersive experience, right? It's a social mobility, cloud, video services in ways that people never would have envisioned that video was being used. And the next generation of that is the Internet of Everything. And you know, it's nice to talk about things that are way off in the future and are going to happen sometime in the Nevada state. The reality is this is beginning to happen now. And it is our forecast that it's actually going to happen faster than that last 25 years of cycle from going from floppy drives to where we are today. So this is the growth in that economy. It went from basically fixed computing to where we are today. The number that's thrown around most of the time is 50 billion devices. And those are all types of devices. So I'll give you one example of one of those devices. Last summer I had to buy my wife a new refrigerator, and she had a choice. And there were 2 refrigerators sitting there. One was a perfectly nice Samsung refrigerator. The other one had a browser in it. And the sales lady was having a hard time explaining to my wife why we should spend $500 extra for one that had a browser in it. I said, it's not really that difficult. I said, it's a stainless steel refrigerator. You can't put pictures of your new grandchildren on that stainless steel refrigerator. You can put digital images on there if you have a CPU on the refrigerator. If that refrigerator is connected to the internet, you can do this sort of thing. And that's actually what we use the thing for, right? It's being a proud grandparent. So connecting things in different ways is something that's going to continue. It's going to release economic value like we cannot imagine. The Cisco report that was put out about 3 weeks ago on the Internet of Everything, Cisco believes that by creating an ecosystem of connecting all things and not worrying about who owns those, but building that ecosystem out amongst everybody, John Chambers tweeted out that that was worth about $14.4 trillion to a global GDP. So there's opportunity abound for everybody, and much of it will impact the industry that we're in, whether we like it or not. So let's talk about what that means specifically in transportation, because this is what we're dealing with. And in our report, you can see there at the bottom the sources, IEEE, Ford, and BBC. The Internet of Everything in Action will have a global economic impact of connecting vehicles together and reducing carbon footprint, increasing our efficiencies. It's going to increase them to the tune of 273%. I did remove the economic impact on this one because it directly impacts my quota for next year. $273 billion worth of global economic impact associated with being able to tie these systems together. And let's talk about what that really means, because we're at a mass transit conference, so everybody wants to talk about connecting buses, and we're going to talk about connecting trains or connecting ADA vehicles. The reality is that in a world of the Internet of Everything, it's connecting all, right? So using transportation as a platform, because we get into these cases all the time where we want to operate autonomous vehicles or remote operated vehicles, and there's one network for the buses, and there's another network for the highways, and there's another network for the urban connected vehicles. The reality is we have to start thinking more broadly and enabling this at a more standards level and tying these systems together. If we continue to operate these in an environment where there's silos, we'll never get to that end state. So transportation, smart connected vehicles. Smart connected vehicles are going to change the world dramatically in the way we operate our systems. And it's really easy to think of these as, well, that'll be in light vehicles, but it'll never happen in OEMs and big buses and trains and all that sort of thing. But, the practical reality is it's going to impact there as well. I actually think they should be first. I think mass transit vehicles should be at the front of the connected vehicle line instead of the back. But for us to get at the front of the line, we're going to have to hurry, because the OEMs are headed there in a quick order. So what does it mean? It means we can connect to the public cloud, we can connect to private clouds, we can connect to enterprise clouds. We can connect to the energy grid, because we can now utilize smart grid in a better environment, right? We can create virtual networks, and we can't really worry. The real beauty in what I said about IntelliDrive and that architectural change from just DSRC based to using other wireless technologies is we can use multiple wireless technologies that are fit for purpose, that actually make sense for connecting to the vehicle. So in the end, we can tether our cell phone. We can connect to a Wi-Fi hotspot in our home. We can use multiple 3G or 4G technologies. We can use satellite communications. We can use DSRC communications to talk to the roadside, to the traffic light. In the end, all of these will be part of the connected vehicle. That's an automobile. Quite frankly, there's more activity going on in that side right now. But that ecosystem is essentially the same. You could replace that same image with a bus. And many of those communications technologies exist today on a bus. They exist today on a train. But almost all of them are disparate systems. They're not connected together. There's no systems engineering process to utilize them. Many of them are proprietary networks that you couldn't tie into another network if you needed to. So we need to begin to break down these barriers to be able to enable the future. It's not something that I think is long-term off. I think these things are happening now. We have to focus on how we can help deliver those so that we can enable that Internet of Everything and release that economic value. Thank you.
So now we have the service model, which is already coming from autopilot. We have the vehicles, we have the infrastructure, and the question is, who's in a position to pull all this stuff together? I'd say it is public transportation. We have the ability to form standards and to integrate systems in order to deliver those services. And our next speaker is going to talk about how they're looking to do this on Cape Cod. Welcome, Larry Harmon.
I'm going to use the up and down thing. Yeah. Great. Thank you. I'm Larry Harmon. I'm co-director of the Geographics Lab at Bridgewater State University. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about the setup that actually Barry has given us. He's asking for places where he can help, and I'm here to say we need help. Let's talk a little bit about why I call it the E-Transit, or what's going on in Cape Cod. First, and I'll go through this relatively quickly, you can grab your books later, but historically we were one of the first in the country to use GPS for ABL as a part of a grant we had through the US DOT. And we've worked on this using GIS, obviously, but also to try to talk about some of the emerging wireless technologies as well. Most recently, we had a relatively large ARA project, which helped us develop, basically bring everything up to speed for a number of different modes, and in terms of how we communicate, but also in terms of how the customers use this new piece. There's a parallel ARA project to the Transit ARA project, which we discovered relatively quickly, and has been happening all across the country. And that's the BTOP, I can never remember what it is, but basically it comes out of the Department of Commerce, and essentially was a $40 million open Cape broadband, which laid 100 gigabit fiber optic cable down through Cape Cod and southeastern Mass. So the first one, basically, we brought everything up to speed, and if you go into the showcase next door, you'll see many of these folks here. Again, we were one of the early innovators in putting on mobile technology on our transit and paratransit vehicles, and that means you're one of the first ones that gets old. So it was important to update it, and we did that, including, since this is an electronic fare conference, including bringing together our electronic fare systems, particularly for our fixed route, and relating them to the GPS technology. For some of you, it was mentioned, and Stefan mentioned it, the Mobility Services for All Americans notion of a one call, one click. And in particularly for us, there was an intermodal aspect of that we really need to get a hold of. And this is, Barry was talking about sending stuff back and forth, and what we found out relatively quickly was that we weren't the only ones that were using GPS and ABL for paratransit and fixed route, but that also that the intercity bus industry, in this case I'm illustrating what came out of Boston to Cape Cod, and also from New York to Cape Cod, but the ferry systems, and if you've been to Cape Cod, you'll realize that many people want to vacation in Cape Cod, and many also want to go through to the offshore islands, which are quite beautiful. I actually get to go there every now and then. And they came from very different purposes for the non-transit side of it. I was not aware that ABL was going into intercity bus industry through the Homeland Security, but once I was aware of it, it was pretty clear that we wanted that information, because the important piece for the tourism industry on Cape Cod is we really can't take too many more cars. I use the notion, how many have been to Cape Cod? How many have been to Cape Cod in the wintertime? One. Okay. Most of us people come to Cape Cod in the summertime. Unfortunately, the population goes from 200,000 to 600,000. Now people are telling me it's actually closer to 1 million. That's an awful lot to put on a peninsula when there's 2 bridges and there's essentially only a couple of roads going east and west and one going north and south. You really can't take it too much, and it does impact on your vacation experience, and you'll go somewhere else if it's too crowded. So everybody got the point that we have to find people to get to Cape Cod without their car. Well, first is everybody always drove to Cape Cod, so how would you know even how to get there? So we basically said, if the intercity bus industry has GPS and ABL on its vehicles, I want that information. That's our information. The government paid for all of that. So let's get that out where somebody can get it. Luckily, I knew the guy who owned this intercity bus industry. Had been on my board when I was a dial-ride manager. And I said, let us in there and get to your server and send that stuff up to the university, and we'll map it in web mapping. This is Microsoft's big maps. So what you're seeing here is basically all those intercity buses going back and forth to Cape Cod from Boston. And then what you're showing is that we have a significant number of paratransit and fixed route alternatives for them. That was important was for the folks who were in Boston that really didn't think you'd get there. Now you have very, very rapid refresh times. Same thing is true for the ferries. is I went to school with a couple of guys who ran the ferries, and I said, let us put some of this stuff on your ferries, and then we'll be able to track it. What we found out was that after 9/11, all harbors have identification friend or foe. And you can take that information and you can pull that out and map it on the same piece. So literally said, well, let's start pulling that all together. And we have all the ferries going from Boston to Provincetown along Cape Cod Bay, and everything coming out of Hyannis and Falmouth to the offshore islands of Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket. And you can get it on your smartphone. So we kind of worked out that. Then we had a couple of really brilliant students that said, basically we want to take out all that information, put it on your smartphone, and particularly adapt it for people with developmental disabilities and other challenges, so that you can connect with the caregiver, they can see where they are, you can constantly know what's going on. If you have a problem, you can send a message. Well, it just took a couple of really smart students, and they have this together. The issue now is the estimated time of arrival, and that's pretty well clear. Just to go on quickly, the other notion we said as a part of our hour is we want to have an electronic fare system, and I apologize for the imagery. That's what happens when you carry these things around in your wallet. But what we didn't want was to have one more independent electronic fare system. So we ended up having a procurement in which every regional transit authority that has an electronic fare system is on a Charlie card, which is down the road. It happens to be Shite Parkman. So the card that you use in Boston, you can use on Cape Cod. The card you get on Cape Cod, you can use in Boston and 12 other RTAs. So we made it real easy for them to move from place to place. The next trick is to basically, how do we get that onto the intercity bus industry? And essentially the breakthrough is if you go next door, the Masabi system is now on commuter rail, so you can use your smartphone to ticket yourself a commuter rail. That exactly the same thing can happen with all the intercity carriers coming from Boston and New York. So we're basically making it easy for people, and that is the 2020 vision of how do we get careless, and I call it carless, could be careless too, and car-free on Cape Cod. Particularly, you can be careless if you don't drive. And that ties me into what basically Stefan has been kind of getting me excited about. Let's talk a little bit about the Cape Cod characteristics. Being a transportation geographer, I have to show you my maps. But how many have been to Cape Cod again? A small number. How many have heard of Henry David Thoreau? Henry David Thoreau talks about the bare and bended arm thrust into the Atlantic. Anybody see a resemblance here? And the skinny bicep is right here, that's where I live. Basically, the characteristics of that is significant for any transportation geographer, any transportation provider. Let's talk a little bit about what they're doing. My father wasn't stupid when he built a cottage down there in 1933. It was a nice place to be. My son Brendan and I use that cottage today. It's a very, very nice place to be in the wintertime because the snow goes away with all the salt. It's a very nice place to be in the summertime because you can't go anywhere without hitting the beach, and there's some really good fishing. So, nice place to go. People are not stupid in Massachusetts, and most people who had to work in Boston or even New York ended up coming down with some really nice houses down there. Some of you may recognize the name Kennedy. This one happens to be I'm in the low rent district, he's in the high rent district. A lot of nice summer homes down there, and those people are well off. We also find demographically they're quite healthy, and they get rid of their home in Boston and New York, and they spend the last years of their life down there. Now that's pretty neat, except what we were just hearing from our paratransit, our folk on the table here, is that after a while it's really not safe for them to drive. But they're down there, and they have a nice car, and they're going to have a nice new car that's going to have all this connectivity capability to it. How can we get those people to live out a very nice life? And the quality of life is quite high, probably to right to the end. Keep that mobility that they have. Because the next slide talks to you about, so when they're way down the end, I want to point out the little green thing up in what we call the Cape Cod, the armpit. They wouldn't like it in that particular Buzzards Bay area, but the armpit of Cape Cod is a big green area. That's a big military base, and I'm going to get to that later. It even shows up even earlier, easier here, in that the heavy green near the armpit used to be called Camp Edwards firing range. So you don't want to live in a firing range, for those of you who understand ordnance. But if you also notice that place where we had in the previous slide, where there was a high incidence of elderly in the pink, is now low density, very low density, because these people have 1 acre zoning and they have very, very nice houses. So how are we going to move those folks around when they really can't drive safely? They also have as a geographer, I have to show my Edward Luhmann flow charts. It's very easy to track now with this kind of technology exactly where people are going. In particularly since we made sure that the GPS ABL was integrated with the electronic fare system. I thought that was a slam dunk, but apparently it's not in this country. But it is in Cape Cod. So we made sure that both manufacturers had to make sure that every 5 seconds there's a lat long going into the automatic fare box, and every transaction that goes through the Shike Parkman fare box also picks up a lat long and sends it in real time. So as an old intelligence guy, I like collateral sources of data. We have 2 data sources, nobody can screw it up, and huge capabilities for analysis. You talk about big data. You can't get bigger data than every 5 seconds you know what's going on, you know every transaction. The industry is going to really know who we serve and how we serve them, what particular kind of fare packages work for them, and it's going to give us that capability that we really need. Now let's talk a little bit about communication. It has been a revolution, and Barry really set me up really well. And I started the system back in the mid-70s, and you had 450 megahertz radio, that was it. And you're sending 96 watt across on your little mobile data terminals. Pretty low stuff. When Wi-Fi came out, actually this was an outdoor Wi-Fi system that we tried at the university. You hang it off a light pole at that time. It plugged into the top, a little blue thing on the top, and it was 802.11b and A. A was for the backhaul on the 5 gigahertz, and B was what everybody else used. At that time, B became G pretty quickly. The little chart on the left talks about person area networks, Bluetooth. Talks about wireless networks in the 802.11 standard. It talks about metropolitan area networks called WiMAX, 802.16, not well used around here, but in parts of Asia it certainly is used, particularly Taiwan. And then the other one is the cell phone, the 802.20 piece, which all of us use. We tried to create what we call a Wi-Fi, an outdoor Wi-Fi mesh village with that outdoor Wi-Fi antenna, which Cisco bought out, by the way. And immediately we had this incredible capability throughout what we call our college Wi-Fi e-transit village, with our little buses running around in between that, within those pieces. The good news is that those little things hang out there. We were the one, what was Intel's most 100, in the top 100 for Wired magazine, as a Wired University. When we put those things in there, we were in the top 10 for Intel for unwired universities. And that's over the world. So thanks to a transit grant, we ended up in this incredible wireless piece. That's the good news. The bad news is it didn't work for transit because it couldn't reassociate with the next spot at that particular time. So we ended up finding out we had to wait, essentially with the cellular, we had to wait for the mobile capabilities to catch up. We also wanted to look at something that had a wider range. Let me get to that. So the big news has come on here. Thank you. The big news is that with that ARA grant that we talked about, we now have 100 gigabyte fiber cable running down from Brockton and Providence throughout Cape Cod. Now they're hanging it off the poles. You're familiar with what we did with the Wi-Fi. 100 gigabyte broadband hanging off the poles of all the major roads. That's exactly the way we run our transit. 8 of those 288 strands are in the public domain. I think maybe we could come up with some public partnerships of how to use that piece. But anyway, think about this. The last issue is that how do we get to the last mile? And Barry talked a bit about the DRC wave. This comes out of a UCLA, UC Berkeley comparison about how to do this, and it's a little bit dated. But if you start looking at the DRC wave, the 802.11p, essentially the ITS people are looking at on one end, and then you look at mobile WiMAX on the right, you see that actually some of the characteristics of WiMAX is superior, particularly in terms of they're saying 15 kilometers, but could be 30. The notion is if we could get 1 gigabyte upload and download with less than a millisecond kind of latency, that would basically solve our problems. And if we could integrate those together, The notion about that, the important part of that, is that the university system has a licensed spectrum for WiMAX. So we don't, it's like a utility. We don't have to worry about any interference from somebody else for that whole southeastern Cape Cod, Massachusetts area. What I need is, and to Barry's point, is I need to have a knowledge about these. How do we get these things all together? We talk about integration of the real-time data from for tracking systems on Bluetooth, called Bluetooth, on one end, and then you have the transit on the other. How do we get all that in together in one radio system? I suspect that Cisco makes them. Let's talk a little bit about what we need to get to that. The end piece, as we see it, is to develop this communication network for transit, paratransit services, public, private, the whole deal, so that we can get people, particularly those with disabilities, throughout the Cape to where they want to go. That ends us up with this connected vehicle in which basically the how do I put this? If we go back to that piece where we told you about where the mobility, the Massachusetts Military Reservation was, essentially that map. What's on that base is a National Guard base that flies drones. Flying drones in Afghanistan. It's piped into the to Fort Meade. For those of you who understand Fort Meade, some pretty interesting activity going on in the National Security Agency there. Those people are reservists. That means that's not their day job. We can make the drone pilots on Cape Cod a day job that essentially does what Stefan's talking about. How do you drive my mother and father or grandmother and grandfather around in the Lower Cape with their car? Piece of cake for those guys if you give them the communication network. The communication network was built thanks to the taxpayers of the United States. What we're trying to do now is create the preliminary engineering and concept of operations that lays out what it is that we have to do to create these public-public partnerships and public-private partnerships to fit in with the rest of the folks on this panel. So all we're saying is, we've got the place, we need some help. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now the challenge is here. We don't have an excuse that technologies aren't available, networks aren't available. We have a vision for being able to provide the kinds of mobility we've been talking about in public transit since the 1970s. The question is, well, I guess, what are the questions? Who has questions for our panel? Carl.
Hey, so for the gentleman from Cape Cod, I guess the basic question is, what is the business model you envision to make this transition to your system possible?
So Carl Whitnick is asking, what is the business model for making this possible for Larry?
I'm a bad guy to ask about a business model because I'm 70 years old and I have had a successful business in my life. The model that we're talking about, I'd rather talk about the visions. The 2020 vision that we're talking about now is essentially what we're saying here. If communication, which is what do they call it, the long pole in the tent, if communication is solved or solvable by the end of this year, then we really have an open piece to say, what are the new innovative approaches to transit? As I said, I started transit on Cape Cod when I first dial-ride in the country in '75. I see the end of the traditional dial-ride. I spent most of my life in it. We need a new definition of what paratransit is. We also need this connectivity that I have never seen the capability that we have before. But if you take away all the communication costs from all the intercity public and private vendors, and we integrate that completely with what we have, what they end up on Cape Cod with is a decent fixed route system, a very good paratransit system, and huge opportunities for what we're talking about here. We have something pretty spectacular. So my vision is, by 2020, we should have a full range of opportunities for people to get from basically our big points of Boston and New York metropolitan areas, in anywhere in Cape Cod and through Cape Cod, using your smartphone as your navigator. And it should not just be for those well-heeled or are very healthy folks. It should be people who have their own difficulties and can use this as a navigating tool. So my vision is that's there, that's real close. And I think what was pointed out here today is transit is the tail, and we should be at the nose. And I'll do that through our little, I talked about our e-transit village. We have 3 vehicles running up and down around that campus. We're the first spot that's connected with that 100 gigabit capability, that free capability. We can start it out in Cape Cod, immediately move it to the lower Cape, where it's always going to be dense, and we have a National Park Service that has the same problem we all do. You can't load that national seashore up with cars. So my thought is, from both ends, the shoulder to the end, we can demonstrate this very, very quickly. And I'm saying quickly within 12 months to 24 months, given the fact that we have the folks here that can help. So with that vision, then we just say, okay, we're doing it down at Cape Cod. We're pretty stupid little bloggers. You ought to be able to do it here. You're smart. That's my vision.
All right, thanks.
Question in the back of the room.
This question is for Barry. I can see Google and Cisco and Hawaii being the ones that would look at the virtual network, try to put it together, look at the communication services that's provided, work with providers of that, to make your vision a reality. Most of that is already there. I think it's a matter of putting all these pieces together. As far as the public cloud, the enterprise cloud, which transit is part of both, it's being built and it's there. I guess it's just a matter of thinking with the systems that we already have put in together to feed that information to you. So I see you in the role of leading. Do you see yourself in that role or not?
So the question for Barry is Cisco going to lead on this? Do you want to use the mic? Sure, happy to.
So about 3 weeks ago, we had a Internet of Things World Forum at Cisco campus. We had SAP there, we had Oracle there, we had Verizon, we had AT&T, we had the city of Barcelona, we had Black & Veatch. Cisco sees its role as the enabler. So in this kind of world, if we all enable the standards, the business models, the ecosystem of connectivity, everybody profits by it, right? And you have to see the impediments in order to be able to see how to break through to this. One of my big pet peeves, quite frankly, in this is things like TSP systems, right? So most of the major cities in North America are looking at some level of transit signal prioritization. Well, that means a bus has to talk to a traffic light. How many of them are standard? How many of them are interoperable between systems? How many of them could then exploit that same infrastructure for Cape Cod to be able to speak to automobiles? You know, in the end, there is going to be a large group of companies. Some will be very large companies, successful companies. Some will be very small, kind of open source companies that are non-for-profits. I don't think it's really, you can't expect Silicon Valley to lift this up alone. You can't expect the technology companies to lift this up alone. It's going to take everybody with a focused effort. And I think, Carl, you asked a really good question is, you know, what's the business model behind it? If you start getting at those sorts of things, you know, when we had the city of Barcelona spoke, they basically looked at it as global competition, right? So Cape Cod's in the same position. Cape Cod's trying to keep or drive more people to come there and spend their summers and spend their dollars there. If they become a more difficult environment to get in and out of and to move around in, they can't continue to grow. So it's enabling those technologies and capabilities. And yes, Cisco will be a part of it, but only a small part of the ecosystem.
My first day on the job, my second day on the job, running a small transit agency, I went to a training session. Actually, Larry Harmon was one of the speakers at that. And a lot of people back then were saying, well, gee, one thing you can do in public transportation is to get people out of their cars. And that's why I own it. If you get them out of their cars, how are they going to get anyplace? There isn't enough public transportation to get everybody everywhere. And one of the opportunities that these kinds of technologies and roping them together gives us is that's the feeder network that's able to make viable the long-haul systems that we use in rail and light rail and so forth. If you look at what's happened with Greyhound over the last 2 decades, once Greyhound was able to start abandoning routes and focus on hauling people between cities, and, people suffered at first. There was not connectivity. And then something remarkable happened. The state DOTs started recognizing, the federal government started funding intercity bus programs to be able to reestablish links to those long-haul carriers. In some cases, there's subsidized routes that are carried by Greyhound or Trailways and the like. In other cases, there are routes that are operated by local public transit agencies that are part of the through ticketing systems that are there. We have that same opportunity here. Or the other thing that's going to happen simultaneously with this is services like Autopilot, and I expect Sidecar and Uber and Lyft and Zimride. And if you haven't heard of all of those, they're going to re-privatize. But I don't know that they can necessarily get there because the infrastructure needs to be broadly available if we want to actually provide mobility throughout. Are there other questions?
Actually,
A question for Rob. Rob, you want to take a question?
I'll kind of put you on the spot. Your website that you had up, tax, I work at tax. And my question is, I spend about 5 hours retrofitting for electronics. Would y'all be willing to let me spec out what we need? Because right now we have 19-year vehicles. And any new ones we order, if I can avoid my 5 hours working on them to put in the wiring I need, it would be great benefit. So are y'all willing to spec out new wiring for individuals?
Can't speak for the manufacturer, but what I can do is I can get you in touch with the person that will answer that for you.
Okay.
I am the ground retailer here, but definitely there's opportunities there, yes. And I'll help you with that after this is.
Okay.
All right, so the question was about being able to specify the communications, was that the communication system on there?
Well, everything from, there is no room in the front to put in the electronics, okay? So everything has to go to the back, which means I have to run all my cables from the front to the back. Power, Cat5, video and audio, all have to be run through the roof to get the feeds I need. So if they can be done at the factory, I mean, and I'm sure that everybody else can be in the same boat when they get them. It would just be a great time savings.
Okay, so the question is about being able to specify, being able to run wiring harnesses or the like in order to be able to tie together an onboard system. Another question?
Tap onto that.
Yes.
More correctly, it's being able to accommodate the extra equipment that operators need to use to make those vans serviceable in a paratransit environment or some other commercial environment where extra equipment has to be there for their systems to interface and make that van usable. So an equipment cabinet with pathways for cable to go.
Correct.
So that people can put different types of equipment in there because nobody runs the same stuff.
Right.
That would be most helpful.
In fact, yeah, along that line, just a large conduit run through the roof area with a trail down to the floor area in the back would be great. Just something that we could run our own lines. Right now we're having to take the roof out to get the lines in place. So.
Okay, so we've heard some retrofit suggestions that Rod's going to take back to the manufacturer.
Yes.
Back of the room.
What's the useful life on that MV1?
10 years.
10 years? What about mileage? Do you have a mileage figure? Mileage-wise?
Mileage?
Mileage on the gasoline engine?
What's the mileage for the useful life in terms of...
I don't have a mileage spec. That design in its original form was a 10-year vehicle.
What is the MPG?
Miles per gallon on it? Runs a V8 engine, 18 highway, 13 city.
I will tell you the only flaw with whole vehicle is the fact that if you're not in a wheelchair, you have to sit in the back, you feel like a little kid.
I will tell you that there is a front seat option coming,
Yeah.
a removable.
Yeah, although that might actually be a good sensitivity exercise for bus operators and for board members, because that's what people in the disability community have been experiencing basically as long as we've had paratransit. Well, I have a question for Patrick Wan from BYD. Could you tell us about what other things you have in the U.S.? I understand that BYD has battery-powered buses in LA. I don't know if you're prepared for that, but if you could just tell us about some of the other things, because this, the remote control thing, I'm fascinated by it. I see it ties into these things, and but I expect there are other people who are looking for technologies that are available in the U.S. market now, and I think that'd be helpful if you would.
Oh, sure. So BYD, so the Suri model is in China only. So BYD is actually a battery manufacturer. BYD was founded in 1995 and came to the US in 1999. And Mr. Warren Buffett invested in 10% of the BYD stock in 2008, which is 5 years ago. So BYD is a Berkshire Hathaway company right now. In the US market, we have two major products using the BYD iron phosphate battery technology. The first one is the electric bus. It's a 40-foot electric bus with a single charge that runs 150 miles plus under the normal driving road condition. We also have a crossover called an E6. It's a crossover full electric vehicle. It has a 60 kilowatt-hour battery pack. So the range for that vehicle is 185 miles on a single charge. So we have another unique technology charging the vehicles. We basically for the E6, the full electric vehicle, we have the 30 kilowatt charger on board. So right now in the market, everything, if you want to do like high voltage charging, so the charger will be like very big. So the unique technology BYD has is onboard AC, onboard inverter charging technology. So that allows you to charge the vehicle in 2 hours from 0% to 100%. That vehicle is available in the U.S. market. And getting back to the bus, so we're working with customers like Stanford University, LA Metro, Long Beach Transit, selling the 40-foot transit bus to the U.S. market. Basically, that is one of the zero emission. Full electric, full battery-powered transit buses in the market right now.
Yeah, thank you. And the last question would be, what are you looking at happening in the next year? I'm going to ask each of you to respond to that in your business.
So we are trying to incorporate more like fancy technologies into the bus and also the E6 full electric vehicle. For example, for the remote control, now we only have that in the Suri model. So we're trying to incorporate that into the full electric vehicle. It's going to be a same function but different technology. And also what we're trying to do is to improve the energy density, because right now the charging infrastructure is not there yet for both of the buses and the electric vehicle. That's a problem for the industry. So what we're trying to do is to improve the energy density of the battery. Right now, for the car, it's only 185 miles. It's a long range, but it's still not good enough for people who want to travel a long distance. So right now, our focus is to improve the battery technology while we're trying to work with the government to install the charging infrastructure in the U.S. And for the bus, it's easier because the routes are there, and the routes are for the transit companies. They have certain routes. So for example, for the Long Beach Transit, they have like 50% of their routes are less than 150 miles, which is in the range of the bus. So we can figure it out based on the different scheduled plans with the transit company. But basically, we're trying to improve the battery technology, the battery energy density, while we're working with the society to build up the charging infrastructure. That's the key to the zero emission, full electric transportation market.
Thank you. Great. Thanks. Rod?
Yeah.
You'll tell us what you got think's going to happen over the next year or so?
Next
for you
year,
guys?
yes. With the integration of the new LX MV1, a couple of things are coming in the immediate future in this year. Electric side door and ramp deployment. Currently, the MV1, you operate the ramp, the electric ramp. When you open the side door, the function buttons are actually on the interior wall of the door. Kind of limits some of the market. With the automatic deployment, much like our competition, from a key fob, they'll be able to open the side door, deploy the ramp. Opens up a whole new market for people who drive from their chairs. Removable front passenger seat is being... MV1 is an OEM manufacturer. They're held to a higher standard. So any change they make to that vehicle, obviously they have to go through the removable passenger front seat, integrated DIN-style radio with navigation and backup camera. Those are features that are coming on 2013. A V6 engine is in the future. That's probably more than a year out, but it is in the works. So,
all right, great, thank you. Barry, you want to tell us what you see happen next year or so?
Absolutely. So I think one of the most compelling events that we hope to actually see occur this year is the NHTSA ruling in August, the decision to decide, as it's famously known. I think that'll be one of the key drivers. I wrote a couple of things down. The other thing we forgot to mention was that there are currently 4 states that have already passed driver's license for remote operated vehicles, right?
So well, for autonomous vehicles.
For autonomous vehicles. So the industry's beginning to tip on that. I think what we're going to see this year is probably the first mover city that's going to take this on as a project, a connected vehicle project, and look at to differentiate in a global competition. I don't want to predict who that is today. There's some people, some countries that are clearly looking at that. From a Cisco perspective, one of the key things that we want to see and want to accomplish this year is to complete the intelligent, the connected vehicle infrastructure and architecture and bound all of it in security so that it's basically purpose built and security built from on board the vehicle to all the way back to the traffic management center. That won't be Cisco unique. It's just something we're going to build as a total architecture to make sure that there is a standards model that moves forward. And I think we're also probably going to see a first mover OEM. Years ago, connected vehicle was seen as something that was an impediment, something that nobody wanted to do until somebody made the ruling. I think that the OEM manufacturers have realized that it's now technology's competitive advantage, and somebody's going to break from the pack first. I can't predict who that is right now, but I suspect we're going to see that this year.
Very good, thank you. Larry?
Well, this year is a planning year, and we're funded to do that planning. And the first product we should have is a concept of operations for what I'm calling the Cape Cod TransNet communications system. And that would be highway and transit and everybody else we can pull together on that. And there are 2 research paths that I'd like to work on. One is, as you can tell, we're a little overwhelmed by the competing radio technologies that this is going to take place, so we're hoping we can sort through that and see where things are going. I think Barry has helped me a great deal in seeing where that's going to happen. And then last is what we're calling locally is the development of research on autonomous but also semi-autonomous paratransit, which we're calling robo-doctor. for lack of another term, in the rural and suburban environments. And actually, Stephanie's convinced me that that's really where we should start, is to try these things, and particularly since we know the area pretty well, we'll try to set that up. So we'll hopefully at the end of this year, we'll have some sort of a concept that we're testing on campus that can be deployed probably in the next year when all the radio technology pieces have come to fruition. Thank you.
So the opportunities here, all the players that could implement this are here, and I'm hoping that you'll be part of this also over the next year. Give a hand to our speakers, and thank you all for listening.